It's Veritas Forum with Dr. Craig Johnson, Professor in Residence of Chalcedon Christian Academy and Pastor of Bethel Christian Fellowship in Agora Hills.
Welcome to Veritas Forum. My name is Craig Johnson. My guest is James Patrick Holding, president of Tecton Apologetics. He's the author of Shattering the Christ Myth, The Mormon Defenders, and The Impossible Faith. Welcome, JP.
Thank you, Craig.
Let's talk about biblical illiteracy. I know one of your favorite topics. There's a crisis in the church. Tell us about it.
Okay, this is one that's guaranteed to make me blow my stack, because I've seen this happen over and over again so many times to so many people. And unless we do something about it, one scholar, Daniel Wallace, has said that we have less than 50 years before America is like Europe in terms of the way the churches are. And if you've been to Europe, do you know what it's like over there?
Yes.
I mean, the churches are turned into museums. The Christians comprise perhaps 2% of the population. Now, that's not to say we're without hope, because in third world countries, Christianity is exploding. But we don't want to be like Europe is now either way. That's not what we want.
What's the antidote to biblical illiteracy?
Antidote to biblical illiteracy. Well, let's just start by getting to the root cause of it. What causes the problems in the first place? And I've broken this down into 7 basic steps that I've seen repeated time and time again. The first thing is simply neglect on the part of churches in terms of educating people in the basics of our faith. They don't explain to them why they should believe what they believe, other than perhaps in terms of a vague feeling, like I have Jesus in my heart. Now, we don't hear about things like what I've written about in my books. We don't hear about things like people saying that Jesus didn't exist. We don't hear about things like people saying that the Gospels are not authentic, or Paul didn't write half the letters that have his name on them, or that events recorded in the Bible never actually happened as reported. Instead, what these churches have fallen for in many cases is this idea of entertainment and indulgence. Now, there was a church near me that I offered to teach at one time, and I never heard back from them. But I did see at one point they decided to host a skateboard demonstration by a Christian skateboarding group. Now, maybe they have some success in evangelism, but what kind of attitude does that suggest towards educating their people?
Skating around the issue.
Skating around the issue. Jesus saves, dude. That's an excellent message to keep you going. And so what we have here, they would rarely consider inviting a teacher, such as you or I, much less someone like a seminary professor, to come and talk about their faith and to explain why they should believe Christianity. And I suspect this is because many pastors feel threatened by someone like that. They're afraid that they'll come in and correct them or say something that they can't handle. And that leads to stage 2. Because our typical churchgoer is not educated in these matters, when they first time see something like someone claiming that Jesus didn't exist or what have you, they're completely caught off guard. What's their reaction going to be if they've never heard this before? Why didn't my pastor tell me about this? Why didn't my deacons tell me about this? Why didn't my family tell me about this? And for many people, they can brush it off very easily. But many more people are going to start asking questions about that.
So if they see Religulous, or they see the movie Zeitgeist, or the movie The God Who Wasn't There, they have no armor whatsoever.
Precisely.
No protection. And so the emotional response might be they throw their faith off altogether.
Precisely. That's the third stage. They start having questions. They wonder what's going on. They see something like Religulous for the first time. It's like going into a battle with a medieval knight buck naked. That's exactly a good analogy right there. So then we have in the fourth step, once they go to someone like their pastors or like their Sunday school teachers, these people cannot answer their questions. Now, you're a pastor yourself, and perhaps you know of this kind of thing. I know of people who have gone to seminary, and they tell me that most of the students there are looking for degrees in counseling, in preaching, but not in things like biblical exegesis. You may get 1 or 2 courses in that, but they're mainly looking to become counselors when they become pastors. They are not looking to become someone who can answer people's questions. Okay? And likewise, your average Sunday school teacher, your average deacon, they're no more getting involved in this either. You might have the occasional hobbyist who's interested in something like this, but for the most part, someone who comes with a question about a film like Religulous or about the Christ myth idea, they'll be told something like, well, questioning is evil, you're not showing adequate faith, you just need to show your faith, you just need to continue to believe, and that's it. And that's not going to be sufficient. That's not going to answer these people's questions.
Now, when the movie Zeitgeist came out, and all of a sudden there's a declaration that Christ is just a copycat of Mithras or Dionysus or Osiris, and other religions in the world have dying and resurrecting gods, and you in your book Shattering the Christ Myth dismantle that and demonstrate it's not true. None of the claims are true. But I would not have any guard. My 12-year-old son would not necessarily have any point of reference and would have no one to go to with regard to that. And that field is a very narrow, scholarly area of expertise. So we are in a crisis.
Precisely. You don't just pick this stuff up at Walden Books. And it's not in the manga section. It's not where all the stuff is that everyone's going to read. Daniel Steele is not writing about it either. So the next step is related to the problem we're having in the church, and that is in the public sector, in the secular world, we are not being taught critical thinking skills, and we're being taught to be tolerant of all sources. Everyone's opinion is as good as anyone else's, especially when it comes to religion. And we have sources like Wikipedia that anyone will readily believe. And so the society at large is teaching our people to be uncritical, and they are following along in that. Now, number 6. These people who are looking at these things for the first time continue to investigate, hoping to find out more information. They come across literature written by cynics and skeptics that are saying more of the same thing. Now, the reality is that this literature is no more informed than any other literature they've been reading before. It's no more informed than Religulous or anyone who writes about the Christ myth and supports it. But because all our people have is what they might call common sense, and that's all these people have that they're reading, they will simply accept what they're saying and think, that guy makes a good point. And they can't find any problem with what they're saying because they're not well educated enough. The example I like to use is the claim that some skeptics will make, well, we don't have the originals of the New Testament. They're just copies of copies of copies, and who knows how badly they've been corrupted. Well, as we talked about before, when some of these secular scholars deal with the classic works of ancient literature, they don't have the originals of those either. But they're not running around scared about that, and they're not making an issue of it. But the average person will not know this, and they will think it's a big deal that we don't have what Paul originally wrote. And they won't know any better, and so they will continue to worry about it. And by that time, we get to step 7. By the time they get to this stage, where their doubt is so strong, it's useless to provide them with any information from credible authorities. Someone like a Bruce Metzger or a Daniel Wallace, who is an expert in the subject of the text and why it is not a problem that we don't have the originals. By the time you bring this to someone at this level of doubt, they'll think that this is someone just making excuses for what is obviously a huge problem. And then they will fall into the trap of thinking, well, obviously you're trying to hide something. This is a conspiracy. You didn't teach me this when I was growing up. Therefore, I need to give this up. And so they think that we're just offering some desperate effort to solve a real problem, not realizing there isn't a problem at all. And by that time, it is often too late to get through to someone, and you have someone who may be a full-fledged apostate.
Now, you, in a previous program, had read some you called anti-testimonies,
yes,
which are heartbreaking. You mentioned 2 or 3 of them, of people who were 49 years serving the Lord in church, and they run across Religulous or Zeitgeist or The God Who Wasn't There or read a Richard Dawkins book, and they think this is all new stuff, and they have no guard against it, and they renounce their faith. That's heartbreaking.
Yes, and we have former pastors who have done that as well. It's a big market out there. It makes a lot of money for some of these former pastors to write these kiss and tell books. It's been going on for quite a while. I mean, Dawkins wasn't the first new atheist out there, and Dan Barker is an example of a former pastor, but he wasn't the first either. There's many of these coming out more and more every day, and especially with self-publishing the way it is, where you can spend $1,000 and publish your own book. So many of these people can just share their dirty laundry with the world and say, this is why I doubt. I think one of the more clear examples lately that really touched me, and I wrote a review in the Christian Research Journal about it, was a book by a fellow named Gary Lanier. Now, have you ever heard of Gary Lanier?
Just from your review.
Okay. Now, he was a Christian heavy metal rock musician, and I believe he won some Dove Awards, and he was very well known. And one day he got into some of this free-thinking literature, and now he's a full-fledged atheist. And he decided to self-publish a book in which he laid out his dirty laundry. The mistakes he makes are incredible. I mean, he just simply read something like Thomas Paine, the early American freethinker, and accepted it at face value. His mistakes are embarrassing in just how bad they are. He likes to say, for example, that the Council of Nicaea decided the New Testament books. He repeats that numerous times. It's completely false. It's taken from Paine, who made the same mistake. Nicaea had nothing to do with the formation of the New Testament. So you see what's happening here. You see, these people do not know any better, and then they spread their not knowing better around to other people who unfortunately don't know any better. And it's just like a domino effect. More and more people come to disbelieve for the same reason.